It's one of the most ubiquitous cars in all of automotive history. A hero of the masses that promised to get you where you needed to go and never let you down. Chances are you know someone who owned one, or you've owned one yourself. From modest beginnings, dipping its toe in the American market, to becoming one of the best-selling cars in the US.
This is everything you need to know to get up to speed.
This is everything you need to know to get up to speed. This is everything you need to know. You need to know. Get up to speed on the Honda Civic! In the late 60s to early 70s, Honda was selling their N and Z600 passenger cars in the US, but they weren't moving a ton of inventory. These cars were powered by small, two-cylinder motorcycle engines. And in the land of V8 powered land barges, nobody really wanted one. Fortunately, Honda was already hard at work designing a replacement for their tiny K car. Their new car, called the Civic, would use a transverse front engine layout. Similar to the Mini over in England. Turning the engine sideways to turn the front wheels meant no running gear going to the back of the car, and that meant more room for passengers and stuff. The design phase was going great, but the suspension was a point of contention. Honda's founder, Soichiro Honda, wanted the Civic to have a solid rear axle. He told his lead engineer, Mamoru Sakata, "I don't see any merit in independent suspension." And Mamoru was like, "No merit in independent suspension? Are you insane?" And Soichiro's all like, "Chill out, dude. I know we're friends, but I'm still your boss." "Oh, my bad. Anyway, independent suspension is better in pretty much every way, especially in front-wheel drive configurations like this new car." And he's like, "Fair enough, you are the engineer, that's why I hired you." And they deep hugged it out. Deep, deep hugged. It's a legendary hug. Read about it on the internet. So the Civic would have independent suspension at all four corners, and that was about as far as the features go. Honda wanted the Civic to be a bare bones daily driver that was still engaging behind the wheel. The Civic's 71 cubic inch, 50 horsepower engine really liked to be driven at high revs, meaning you could make a lot of noise and feel like you were going fast without breaking 35 miles an hour. Honda sent the Civic to American shores in 1973 to a lukewarm reception. It was really good in the city, but that wasn't enough for people to hop on the Civic train. Not yet. That next year, federal law dictated that unleaded gas would be available at every gas station in the country, meaning catalytic converters could be added without getting clogged up with all those lead additives. Most car companies started freaking out, man, but the government was saying they had to put those weird unreliable catalytic converters on their exhaust, but not Honda. Why? Because their new CVCC engine in the Civic didn't need a cat. Almost 10 years earlier, Honda decided that they didn't trust those unreliable little boxes and wanted to make engines that ran cleaner instead of adding a scrubber to the exhaust. The compound vortex controlled combustion engine would run clean enough to pass emissions without a cat. The Civic was years ahead of its American competitors, and people started realizing they didn't really need a huge smog belching sedan to get around town. Maybe they could live with something smaller. Jizz again. A few years go by and it's 1980. Time for the Civic's first refresh. Honda was aiming for staying power that would outlast the now fading gas crisis. To appeal to a wider market, Honda introduced 2 more trim levels to make the car more livable. The DX with a more efficient 5-speed, and the GL with a tachometer. A clock, and cushier seats. Ooh. Even for that time, it was lacking some features, but the Civic was still comfy. By 1981, Honda sold just over 1 million of their little cars. The GL would last 3 years before being killed to make room for the first sporty Civic, the Civic S. It had a rear sway bar, stiffer suspension, and better tires. It was Honda's first entry into the fast-growing hot hatch war, but it didn't exactly captivate the world like the Golf GTI did. So they killed it after just 1 year. 1984 ushered in a new trim that would help define the Civic as a true fun haver, the SI. It was only available in Japan and had a little bulge in it to make more room for the new dual overhead cam engine. The SI stood for Sport Injection. Previous Civics were carbureted, which cut down power, but this one made 118 horses and could do 122 miles an hour. Although I would not suggest it, that sounds terrifying. Around the same time, Honda introduced the CRX in America. It was basically a Civic with a different body. Honda saw that oil prices would keep rising and they wanted a car that could get 50 miles per gallon and still be fun to drive. So they made the Civic more aerodynamic and ripped out the back seats. It was funky, and my second grade teacher drove one. In 1985, we finally got an SI badge in the States, and it was on a CRX. Ours didn't make as much power as the JDM SI, but we were still happy to have it. The CRX got a huge upgrade in 1988 with new double wishbone suspension inspired by Honda's Formula One success with McLaren. The new suspension design made the CRX even more fun. The next year, the Civic was hooked up with a new B16A VTEC engine, but only outside of America. The SI was a for real sports car, a serious option for buyers who didn't have a ton of cash but still loved driving. Another decade began and thus another Civic refresh was due. 1992 saw a smoother, more inviting Civic. The EG hatch kind of looked like an egg, and the SI version now made a punchy 125 horsepower and had rear disc brakes. The next year, two things happened. My son Nolan was born and Honda did something weird. If you wanted a sporty looking Honda with a target top, something that looked mid-engine but wasn't, and that was also front wheel drive, well, there's a new Civic for you. The Del Sol was the CRX's replacement and Honda's answer to the Mazda Miata. But unlike Mazda's Brit-inspired Roadster, the Del Sol was killed 3 years later in 1997.
May he rest in peace.
It was that year that Honda unveiled the sportiest Civic yet, and it wore a red badge. The Civic Type R, or EK9, was the first Civic meant for the track. It had a bare bones interior with bolstered seats to keep you in place, and a Momo steering wheel like an F1 car. Altogether, the Type R was 66 pounds lighter than the regular Civic and made more power too. The Type R got its juice from the legendary B16B, making 182 horses with a redline of 8,400 RPM. The Type R was only available in Japan, which meant Honda fanboys over here were going insane that they couldn't get it. Instead of just whining about it, the Honda faithful started modifying their own Civics and making their own Type Rs. People were swapping B18s into their EFs and H22s into their EG hatches, all in search of a quicker quarter mile time. This phenomenon of modding Civics helped start a little thing called the tuner scene. It's sort of significant. The turn of the new millennium meant another new Civic. Now on its 7th generation, the 2001 Civic had new styling and a simplified suspension. Gone were the Formula One inspired double wishbones, with struts now in their place. The 7th gen also had its own Type R, but this time around, it was very egg-shaped. Still, a Type R is a Type R. The EP3 Type R was a hatch like the first one and made 212 horses from its K20A engine. It was a little more bulbous than its predecessor, but people still loved how it drove. The Gen 8 Civic showed up in 2006 and was a big departure from previous models. Honestly, it was kind of boring, but there was an SI, which had the usual SI flair of stiffer springs and sway bar and a limited slip differential to get you out of the turns quicker. We still didn't get the Type R over here, but there were now 2 versions for the rest of the world. Japan got the FD2 4-door version with a 222 horsepower K20, and Europe got this super funky looking FN2 3-door hatch, which made about 200 horsepower from a different K20, the K20Z. The 9th gen was more of the same Civic we've come to expect, with improved everything. It was a Civic. Do you guys realize how hard it is to make this exciting? The 10th gen Civic arrived in 2015. The styling was crazy! And in 2017, we finally got the Type R here in the US. And it's incredible. It set a lap record at the Nürburgring. It makes over 300 horsepower and has a top speed of 170 miles an hour. The FK8 is the best Civic ever, and I would know because I drove it and I'm in love with it. This car hauls ass. When we started this show, we had all the heavy hitters to choose from. The Skyline, the Supra, the Viper, the M3. The Civic is a heavy hitter too, just for different reasons. There's a Civic for everybody. And to prove it, over 18 million Civics have been sold worldwide. I want to thank you guys. I'm gonna cry. I want to thank you guys from the bottom of my heart for supporting Up to Speed and Donut. This is our 50th episode, and I'm so proud of how hard everybody here works and how far this show's come and how far this channel has come. And it wouldn't be possible without you guys. So here's the 500 more. Hit this little yellow guy right here so you don't miss any episodes of Up to Speed. If you like VTech, check out this episode of Science Garage. If you like VTech, check out this episode of Up to Speed. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at James Pumphrey. Follow Donut at Donut Media. I love you. Sit.